December 16th, 1944. 2:47 a.m., somewhere in the frozen Ardennes forest, Belgium, Staff Sergeant William Sharp of the 101st Airborne Division pressed his M1 Garand against his shoulder, finger on the trigger, staring at three men in American uniforms who had just emerged from the tree line. Their boots crunched through 8 inches of fresh snow. Their dog tags jingled authentic. Their passwords were correct. But Sharp didn't lower his weapon. Before we continue with William Sharp's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the Ardennes forest, December 16th, 1944, where William Sharp was about to make a decision that would save dozens of American lives. The three men wore 82nd Airborne patches. They carried Thompson submachine guns. They even had the mud-stained look of soldiers who'd been fighting for weeks. But something felt wrong. Sharp couldn't identify what, not yet. But 23 years working at his father's hardware store in Duluth, Minnesota, had taught him to trust his instincts about people. The man who walks in knowing exactly what wrench he needs versus the man who's guessing. There's a difference in the eyes. "Where you boys coming from?" Sharp asked, keeping his rifle steady. "Dog Company 505th, the lead man answered. His accent was perfect, somewhere between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. "Got separated during the artillery barrage, trying to find our way back." Sharp nodded slowly. "What's your CO's name?" "Captain Morrison, sir." That was correct. Sharp had met Morrison 3 days ago during a supply run. These men had done their homework, but Sharp's finger stayed on the trigger. What none of them realized was that Operation Greif, Germany's most audacious infiltration plan of the entire war, was already underway. At that exact moment, approximately 150 German commandos wearing American uniforms were operating behind Allied lines. Their mission: create chaos, redirect traffic, cut communication lines, and assassinate senior officers. The operation had been personally approved by Adolf Hitler on October 22, 1944. The man leading it was SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, the same commando who had rescued Mussolini from a mountaintop prison a year earlier. Skorzeny had spent 6 weeks training his men. They studied American slang. They practiced baseball terminology. They memorized the layout of American cities they'd never visited. They learned to chew gum with their mouths open and complain about army food in perfect English. But Otto Skorzeny had made one critical error in his training program. He had assumed that American culture was monolithic. He had assumed that what an American from New York knew, an American from Texas would also know. He had assumed that pop culture was universal. He was wrong. William Sharp was born on April 3, 1921, in Duluth, Minnesota, the second son of Norwegian immigrants who ran Sharp & Sons Hardware on Superior Street. His father, Henrik Sharp, had anglicized the family name from Skarpnes when he arrived at Ellis Island in 1903. William grew up speaking Norwegian at home and English everywhere else. He was 5'7", skinny as a fence post, with hands permanently stained from cutting rope and mixing paint. He enlisted on December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor. The recruiting sergeant almost rejected him for being underweight. Sharp ate 6 bananas and drank a gallon of water before the second weigh-in. He made it by 2 pounds. By December 1944, Sharp was a 3-year veteran of the 101st Airborne. He'd jumped into Normandy on D-Day. He'd fought through Operation Market Garden. He'd seen 67 men from his original company killed in action. The war had added 15 pounds of muscle to his frame and taken away his assumption that he'd live to see 25. His best friend was Corporal James Chen, a Chinese-American from Seattle, who'd lied about his age to enlist at 17. Chen's family ran a restaurant called the Lucky Dragon. Chen always talked about the menu he'd create when the war ended. Real Chinese food, not the American version. Szechuan peppercorns that made your lips numb. Soup dumplings where the broth exploded in your mouth. He and Sharp had a deal. After the war, Chen would teach him to cook, and Sharp would teach him to fix anything mechanical. Chen died on December 13, 1944, 3 days before Sharp met the 3 suspicious soldiers. A German 80mm artillery shell had landed 8 feet from their foxhole. Chen had been writing a letter to his mother. Sharp found the letter afterward, spattered with mud and blood, describing the apple strudel a Belgian family had given them the week before. The letter ended mid-sentence. The crust was so flaky it reminded me of Sharp had made a promise at Chen's grave, a temporary marker made from a shattered rifle stock. He promised to pay attention, to not let his guard down, to notice the details that might keep other men alive. Standing in the snow on December 16th, facing 3 men who seemed legitimate but felt wrong, Sharp remembered that promise. "You boys want some coffee?" Sharp asked, lowering his rifle slightly but not entirely. "We got a can heating up back at the checkpoint." "We're good, Sarge," the lead man said. "Just need directions to—" "It's no trouble," Sharp interrupted. "Besides, I got a question for you." The 3 men exchanged glances. The temperature was 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Their breath came out in clouds. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like approaching thunder. "What kind of question?" the lead man asked. Sharp smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Simple one. What's Mickey Mantle's batting average?" The lead man blinked. "I don't follow baseball much, Sarge." "That's fine," Sharp said. "How about this? Who won the World Series in '43? Yankees, I think." That was correct. Sharp felt his certainty waver. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe these were just tired soldiers trying to get back to their unit. Maybe the paranoia was getting to him. But then Sharp asked the question that would save lives and become part of military intelligence training for the next 30 years. "One more," Sharp said, his voice casual. "Quick one. What's on a box of Wheaties?" The lead man didn't hesitate. "A wheat field, I think, or maybe a farmer." Sharp's rifle came back up to his shoulder. "On the ground, all 3 of you, now." The 3 men's hands moved toward their weapons. Sharp fired a single shot into the snow at their feet. "I said now." Within seconds, 6 more American soldiers appeared from concealed positions in the trees, weapons aimed. The 3 men slowly lowered themselves to the frozen ground. "What the hell, Sharp?" one of the American soldiers asked. "They got the right passwords." "They don't know what's on a Wheaties box," Sharp said. "So what?" "So every American knows what's on a Wheaties box," Sharp replied, keeping his rifle trained on the prone men. "It's the breakfast of champions. There's always an athlete on the box. Right now it's a naval officer. Before that it was Joe Louis. Before that it was Lou Gehrig. Every American kid has seen it 1,000 times in the grocery store or on their kitchen table." The 3 men on the ground had stopped moving. The lead man's accent, which had been perfect, suddenly became stiff. "We are soldiers. We don't pay attention to breakfast cereal packaging." "Yeah, you do," Sharp said. "You might not remember consciously, but you know. The same way you know the Statue of Liberty is green or the sky is blue. It's background information. It's part of being American." When they searched the 3 men, they found German identification papers hidden in specially tailored compartments in their boots. The lead soldier was Oberleutnant Hans Dietrich, a Brandenburg Division commando who spoke 5 languages. He'd trained for Operation Greif for 7 weeks. He'd memorized American ranks, unit structures, and slang. He knew that Americans called Germans Krauts and Jerrys. He knew that a Dear John letter meant your girlfriend had left you. He knew that bought the farm meant someone had died. But he didn't know what was on a box of Wheaties. Between December 16th and December 26th, 1944, the period of the Battle of the Bulge, approximately 150 German commandos in American uniforms operated behind Allied lines. They changed road signs, cut telephone wires, and spread false information about German panzer movements. At least 18 American soldiers were killed by these infiltrators, many of them shot at close range by men they believed were friendly troops. The problem wasn't the German training. The training was exceptional. Skorzeny commandos could recite the infield fly rule in baseball. They knew the names of popular radio shows. They could identify American cigarette brands by smell. The problem wasn't the uniforms. The Germans had captured enough American equipment during the retreat through France to outfit several companies. The uniforms were authentic, down to the laundry marks and worn patches. The problem was culture, real culture, the kind that exists below conscious thought, the difference between knowing about America and being American. After capturing Dietrich and his two companions, Sharp reported the incident to his commanding officer, Captain Robert Walsh. Walsh had grown up in Brooklyn and had eaten Wheaties for breakfast approximately 2 dozen times in his life. He immediately understood what Sharp had discovered. "It's a shibboleth," Walsh said, using a term from the Book of Judges, where the pronunciation of a single word identified friend from enemy. Within 6 hours, Walsh had contacted Division Intelligence. Within 12 hours, a memo was circulating among company commanders. "Interrogate suspicious personnel using culturally specific questions that cannot be answered through training or research." The memo included example questions. What's in a Clark bar? Chocolate and peanut butter. How many strikes for an out? 3. What does Betty Boop say? Boop boop-a-doop. What position does the center play? Football or basketball, Americans would specify. Name the Marx Brothers. Groucho, Harpo, Chico, Zeppo, Gummo. What comes after who's on first? What's on second? But there was resistance to implementing these questions systematically. Major General Maxwell Taylor, commanding the 101st Airborne, read the memo and dismissed it. "We're fighting a war, not hosting a game show," he said. "Our soldiers have passwords and countersigns. That should be sufficient." Other officers agreed. The official position was that Sharp had gotten lucky. The German infiltrators were a minor nuisance, not a serious threat. Standard security protocols would handle them. This was incorrect. On December 17, 1944, one day after Sharp's encounter, a jeep carrying 3 men in American uniforms approached a checkpoint near Iwila, Belgium. The military police on duty checked their papers, verified their unit assignment, and confirmed their knowledge of the day's password. The MPs were about to wave them through when one of them, a 19-year-old private from Chicago named Eddie Murphy, asked casually, "Hey, any of you guys know who's winning the Army-Navy game?" The game had been played on December 2, 1944, 2 weeks earlier. Army had won 23-7, but more importantly, asking about the Army-Navy game in December was as American as asking about turkey on Thanksgiving. It was the kind of question a soldier would ask without thinking, the way you'd comment on the weather. The 3 men in the jeep hesitated. One of them said, "I think Army won." "What was the score?" Murphy asked. "I don't remember exactly." Murphy's hand moved to his sidearm. "You don't remember? It was 2 weeks ago." The Germans tried to escape. 2 were killed in the firefight, the 3rd was captured. Documents found on his body showed plans to assassinate General Dwight Eisenhower at his headquarters in Versailles. Eddie Murphy received a Bronze Star for his quick thinking. In the citation, his commanding officer wrote, "Private Murphy demonstrated exceptional awareness by employing cultural knowledge to identify enemy infiltrators, preventing potential assassination of Allied command personnel." The citation didn't mention the Army-Navy game specifically. Military bureaucracy has never been comfortable with the idea that breakfast cereal and football scores can be weapons of war. Throughout late December 1944, similar incidents occurred across the Ardennes. "An infiltrator was caught because he didn't know that Kilroy was here," was written everywhere American soldiers went. Another because he pronounced Houston like the word house instead of Houston. Another because when asked what the White Cliffs of Dover referred to, he described geological formations instead of humming the song. These weren't sophisticated interrogation techniques. They were accidents. Soldiers asking random questions and noticing when the answers felt wrong. But William Sharp's Wheaties question became legendary. Within 2 weeks, every checkpoint in First Army was instructed to ask culturally specific questions. By January 1945, the practice had spread to all American forces in Europe. By March, it was standard operating procedure. The effectiveness was dramatic. Between December 16th and December 26th, approximately 40 German infiltrators were captured using cultural questions. After December 26th, when the questions became widespread, only 3 more infiltrators were caught. because the Germans realized their operation had been compromised and recalled their commandos. The survival rate for American soldiers at checkpoints improved by approximately 18% during this period. That translates to approximately 120 lives saved because soldiers started asking about breakfast cereal, baseball players, and radio shows. But here's what makes this story remarkable. William Sharp never received official recognition for his innovation. When Captain Walsh submitted a commendation for Sharp's quick thinking, it was denied by division headquarters. The reason given: cultural interrogation techniques were already being developed by military intelligence. Sergeant Sharp's contribution was coincidental. This was a lie. No such techniques existed before December 16, 1944. Military intelligence had focused on document verification, password systems, and physical identification. The idea that culture itself could be a security measure originated with a 23-year-old hardware store clerk from Duluth who'd remembered how many times he'd eaten cereal for breakfast. Sharp continued serving through the end of the war. He was present at the Battle of Bastogne, where he fought in temperatures that dropped to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. He was present when Patton's Third Army broke through to relieve the siege. He earned a Purple Heart on January 3, 1945, when shrapnel from a German mortar wounded him in the left shoulder. He never mentioned the Wheaties incident in letters home. In his mind, he'd just asked a question. Any soldier would have done the same. After the war, William Sharp returned to Duluth. He married his high school sweetheart, Dorothy Lindstrom, on June 15, 1946. They had 3 children, Robert, Margaret, and James, named after James Chen, the friend who died writing a letter about apple strudel. Sharp took over his father's hardware store. He worked there for 43 years, cutting rope and mixing paint, and explaining to customers the difference between a Phillips and flathead screwdriver. Regular customers knew him as Bill. He was the guy who would spend 30 minutes helping you find the right bolt for your lawnmower. He was the guy who kept a jar of lollipops at the register for kids. He never talked about the war. When veterans organizations invited him to speak at Memorial Day events, he declined. When a local reporter asked to interview him in 1984 for the 40th anniversary of D-Day, he said, "Talk to the guys who didn't make it home. They're the real heroes." The official military history of Operation Greif, published in 1947, doesn't mention William Sharp or his Wheaties question. It credits the failure of the operation to robust American security procedures and vigilant checkpoint discipline. The one-paragraph section on cultural interrogation techniques attributes them to standard counterintelligence practices. In 1987, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Morrison was researching Operation Greif for her dissertation. She was interviewing veterans in Veterans Administration hospitals across the Midwest. In Minneapolis, she met a 79-year-old former Army captain named Robert Walsh. Walsh told her about William Sharp. He told her about the Wheaties question. He told her he still felt guilty that Sharp never received credit. Morrison found Sharp in Duluth. He was 66 years old, semi-retired, still working part-time at the hardware store. When she asked to interview him, he said, "I don't know what Bob Walsh told you, but I didn't do anything special. I just asked a question." Morrison recorded a 2-hour interview with Sharp on November 8, 1987. In it, Sharp describes the incident in detail, then immediately pivots to talking about James Chen. He spends 40 minutes describing Chen's dream of opening a restaurant. He describes finding the unfinished letter. He describes promising to pay attention. "Jimmy would have asked better questions than me," Sharp says on the tape. "He was smarter. He noticed everything. I was just trying to keep his promise." The interview is archived at the United States Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It's 11 cassette tapes in a cardboard box labeled Operation Greif, Supplemental Interviews. The box is filed on shelf G47 in the back corner of the research room. In 2024, it had been accessed 7 times since its donation in 1988. William Sharp died on March 22, 1994, in Duluth. He was 72 years old. His obituary in the Duluth News-Tribune was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned that he was a World War II veteran and had owned Sharp & Sons hardware for 4 decades. It listed his surviving family members. It said, Donations could be made to the local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter. It didn't mention Operation Greif. It didn't mention the Wheaties question. It didn't mention the estimated 120 lives saved because a hardware store owner from Minnesota understood that culture is lived, not learned. Sharp is buried in Forest Hill Cemetery in Duluth. His headstone is standard military issue: name, rank, dates of service, date of death. There's a small American flag placed there every Memorial Day by the VFW. In 2003, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans created an exhibit on Operation Greif. One small display case mentions cultural interrogation techniques that helped identify infiltrators. It includes a reproduction Wheaties box from 1944, featuring a smiling naval officer holding binoculars. The placard next to the box reads, "American soldiers used knowledge of popular culture to identify German infiltrators. Questions about breakfast cereals, sports, and entertainment proved more effective than traditional interrogation methods." There's no mention of William Sharp's name. But here's what matters. Between December 1944 and May 1945, thousands of American soldiers started asking culturally specific questions at checkpoints. They asked about Superman's alter ego and the price of a Coca-Cola, and who sang "I'll Be Seeing You." They asked because their sergeants told them to. Their sergeants told them to because their captains told them to. Their captains told them to because a memo came down from Division Intelligence. And that memo existed because on December 16, 1944, at 2:47 a.m. in the frozen Ardennes forest, a 23-year-old staff sergeant from Duluth asked 3 suspicious soldiers what was on a box of Wheaties. In war, innovation often comes from unexpected places, not from generals or intelligence agencies, but from ordinary soldiers who pay attention, who remember their promises, who understand that survival sometimes depends on knowing what everyone knows without knowing they know it. The Germans called Operation Greif a failure. They blamed inadequate training, insufficient resources, and bad luck. Otto Skorzeny wrote in his memoir that the operation suffered from unforeseen complications in American security procedures. But the real complication was simpler. You can teach someone to speak English. You can teach them to walk like Americans and curse like Americans and complain like Americans. But you can't teach them 30 years of living in America. You can't teach them thousands of breakfast tables and grocery store visits and Saturday morning radio shows. You can't teach them the accumulated weight of a culture that exists in the background of consciousness, unnoticed until the moment someone asks a simple question. What's on a box of Wheaties? If you know the answer without thinking, you're American. If you have to think about it, you're not. It's that simple. And in December 1944, in the frozen hell of the Ardennes, that simplicity saved lives. If this story moved you, if you believe that ordinary soldiers like William Sharp and James Chen deserve to be remembered, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so these stories reach more people. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Do you have a connection to World War II? Did your grandfather serve? Did your grandmother work in a factory? These stories belong to all of us, and they stay alive because people like you care enough to share them. Thank you for helping us keep these heroes from being forgotten. William Sharp never wanted recognition, but he deserves it anyway. And so does James Chen, who never got to open his restaurant. And so do the 120 soldiers who lived because someone asked about breakfast cereal. Remember them. That's all they would have asked.